Today we're going to talk about programmed drums versus real live recorded drums, why I use them on all of my heavy metal covers, why I think you should too, and my top 5 tips on how to get yours sounding great. Before we jump into it, I do stream twice a week on Twitch. Links for all of that are in the description. I stream on Mondays and Thursdays. It's super cool, chilled, fun, video game music related times. Head on over, and any questions about any of this stuff, I'm happy to have conversations about it. It's all good. You may or may not be aware that for my heavy metal covers, I use programmed drums instead of a full-on live recorded kit with a drummer behind the kit playing away with a whole bunch of mics and all of that stuff. You know, the proper way to do it. There's definitely a strong sentiment among a lot of people who say that you should never use programmed drums. It's cheating. It's not real. It's like mechanical. It's computerized. It's not a real musician playing a real part. And I mean, part of me understands that, but also, like, come on, man. It's 2020, all right? Get with the times. I think it's very easy to say, yeah, you should never use programmed drums. You should always record with an actual kit. But I mean, look at the size of this room, right? This is my music recording room. I don't have room for a drum kit in here. And even if I did, if I was playing drums all hours of the day, do you know how many people in the proximity I would irritate? Mainly my wife. I don't want to start doing that. I think there is a very, very strong argument against recording live drums. I don't have the space. A lot of people don't have the space. It costs a hell of a lot to get a decent drum kit sounding good. You need to have a lot of technical know-how on the physical setup of a kit. You also need to buy a hell of a load of mics. You need to have an interface that can take all of those mics. You then need to be able to have mic positioning techniques to get the best out of it. You then need to run it all through processing to get everything just sounding absolutely crisp and clear, and get the right compressor to get the most out of your signal and all of that stuff. And then on top of that, you need to be able to play drums reasonably well to get a good musical performance out of it. All of that is time, money, space that a lot of people, myself included, don't have. Programmed drums, however, it's a super simple, super cheap alternative to actually recording full drums, which is as quiet as my headphones can go for other people, so I'm not annoying them. And personally, I think they sound pretty damn good. Hopefully, if you know my metal covers by now, you agree with this, that the drums on my record sound pretty good. Yes, the super elite music snobs out there will be able to go, you can so tell it's programmed. Ugh, I can't listen to it. And in which case, if that's you, that's fine. No worries. You live your life in peace and don't worry about it. But I think for most people, they enjoy the music without having to worry about whether an actual drummer has sat behind a kit and played any of these parts. Hopefully, any of you out there who also use programmed drums aren't ever dissuaded to do this by people online saying, you should never use programmed drums, you should get a real kit. I don't know. I feel like stuff sounds so good these days with software that screw it. Why the hell not, right? So anyway, into the bulk of the video, I'm going to show you my 5 tips for how to program drums, not only just to make them sound good, but really the main thing that is worth taking away from this is how to make them not sound programmed, right? That's the real trick of doing programmed drums well, is that it doesn't sound like a robot. It's just playing things all at max velocity at an impossible rate that no human could ever play. For the purpose of this video, I will be showing you my workflow, my current projects for one of my heavy metal covers. I'm using Reaper, which is a free audio workstation. The drums that I'm using are Steven Slate Drums 4. You should definitely check them out. The samples are awesome. And I have a whole bunch of audio processing for all the drums, so I've got them sounding in a particular way. The main thing that we're going to be looking at, though, for this video is the actual programming of them and how I put the notes together and what we should be doing with that. Tip number 1 is get used to editing velocity control. Velocity is specifically how hard each drum or cymbal is actually hit with a stick. This is how you get drums to sound more human. No drummer out there is hitting every single drum and cymbal at full pace the entire time. There is nuance, there is things that they are consciously and subconsciously doing to make drum hits a little lighter or harder depending on the flow of the song, the tempo, even down to like on a beat per beat basis. In Reaper, the process for that is you can see the different colors of the notes. They respond to these things down here. You have this kick drum here. If I turn the velocity down, it's super light. If I turn it up, it's being hit harder. So let's take a snare, a random snare in the middle of nowhere. Right now, that is 105 velocity. It goes from 0 to 127. I bring that down. The drum is not being hit as hard. I bring it all the way up. And you have got someone absolutely spanking that snare drum. It is all about figuring out where to have things hit lightly, where to have them hitting softly. If you have too many hard hitting snares in a row, it's just not human. That's where people are going to be able to tell, hang on a second, that sounds programmed as all hell. Let's take this drum beat, for example. This is like a 6/8 kind of closed hi-hat based rhythm. Let's have a listen to the beat. So the main thing here with velocity control is that the hi-hats are being hit super hard whenever there is a snare at the same time, or whenever there is a kick at the start of the bar. So it's kind of like the beat one of each bar, right? So you've got bars of 3 here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And on those beat ones, that's where those hard hitting velocities are hitting in there. All the other ones, you can see there's green colors here. If I highlight them, you'll actually be able to see there. They're coming way down in actually how hard they're being hit. So you end up with... If I turned the velocities up on all of these hi-hats, this is what it would sound like instead. And all of a sudden, that hi-hat is just poking out of the mix. It sounds really just bam, 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 bam. It takes some of that human performance element out of it, and that is what you want to be completely avoiding when programming drums. We compare that super harsh, robotic-sounding hi-hat with what it was like before. And just with taking, 8 different notes and changing how hard they've been hit, the whole beat sounds completely different. So velocity control is your friend. You should be using it to make things sound not ridiculously robotic. Tip number 2 is try and program like a drummer would play. Do you know how to play some drums? Even just a basic small amount of drums. Like, do you know how a simple rock beat is put together? Try and have that playing in your head. Try and imagine what your hands would be doing for a simple rock beat when you're programming your drums. If you don't know anything about playing drums, chances are you're probably not going to be programming them. So to get to this point of putting a rock or a metal or any kind of thing together where you've got different instruments, including drums, chances are you probably know a little bit about what a kick and what a snare and what hi-hats and cymbals and stuff are. If you don't know anything about it, have a look online. Just like find some basic how to play drum videos just so you can get it in your head. You don't need a kit. You don't need anything physically to actually take all of that stuff in. It'll just put your mindset in the mindset of an actual drummer, and you'll start to learn the physical limitations of playing drums and putting fills together. Like an example, so you got like quite a fast little fill there, and what's happening is you've got 2 quick snares and then 4 quick bass drums. And what I've done to accent the start of those bass drums is hit a cymbal. I would not at this point have 2 cymbals playing here, even though that sounds kind of cool, right? But if you can actually break down what's happening there, it doesn't sound very realistic from what a drummer would physically be able to do, because what you've got is 2 snare hits and then immediately 2 simultaneous cymbal hits, and it's just not a natural thing for a drummer playing in this kind of stuff to go right, left together. It would be weird. It would be pretty robotic. Unless you're Mike Mangini, then the rules don't apply. Right there, I have made a consideration that a drummer would be going right stick, right stick, and wouldn't have the speed to be able to get to that other cymbal, so they probably wouldn't make that decision. At least my imaginary program drummer in my head wouldn't make that decision. So that's kind of one example of thinking like a drummer. The main thing here is that if you write a fill that a drummer wouldn't play or you wouldn't use, it's going to sound like you're using programmed drums. Tip number 3 is, if you can, try and play and input your drums with a MIDI keyboard or a MIDI controller or something that doesn't have to be some enormous kit. What I tend to do with all of my covers is I actually record the first pass of them using a MIDI keyboard. So I play kind of keyboard drums. So this means that when I actually get a first recording in, a lot of those velocities and how hard things have been hit and how the drum beats have been put together in a way that a drummer might think about playing them. You could be recording full on drum beats. Or if you want to start way more simple, just take, like, say the kick and a snare from a beat and just record those manually. It sounds simple, and you might be thinking, well, why didn't I just click those in? But the fact is that if you play those with a keyboard, you are going to be hitting certain things subconsciously a little bit lighter. So say the kick drum just before the snare. is hit a little bit lighter than you would have had you been programming them. And it's little tiny, little subtle things like that that compound over time that make the whole thing sound less robotic. So if you can, record your MIDI drums or your program drums with a MIDI controller and practice keyboard drums, because among anything else, it's pretty good fun to be able to play drums on a keyboard. So tip number 4 is to quantize your drums. Quantizing drums or quantizing MIDI notes is the process of taking a whole bunch of notes, MIDI notes, and snapping them to a certain grid. So if you've got things that are ever so slightly out of time, you can actually snap them to land on every quarter note or eighth note or 16th or whatever. This is a point of contention with a lot of people, because this is the moment where program drums start to sound less human, less robotic, right? You know, you're snapping everything so it's perfectly bang on the grid, and the best drummer in the world won't be hitting things perfectly bang on. There's always going to be a little bit of a maybe hitting before or after the beat. And it's little things like that that make it sound more human. A lot of this stuff comes down to personal preference, right? And it depends what genre you're playing and recording. But for me, I'm recording metal. It's modern metal, and I want it to sound precise. I want those drums to sound bang on in time. I want it to sound like I have got the most like ridiculously tight drummer playing behind all of my guitars and bass. So I quantize my tracks. So as an example, I record a drum beat right now using my MIDI controller, and then we'll quantize it afterwards and just see what I'm talking about. So let's have a look at the actual MIDI that I just recorded. Because of the ever so slight latency with my audio interface, everything appears like it's been hit ever so slightly too early. So first thing I would do in this scenario is just tidy things up by bringing it forward just enough so it's kind of a bit closer to being in time. And then right there, you might play this back and be like, do you know what? I like that. It doesn't need any more tidying up. And this might sound fine. Let's have a listen. It sounds fine, but there's a couple of bits where things are coming in a little bit too early. I'm not a big fan of it, so I am going to quantize it. So I am selecting all the notes I want to quantize, which is just this first few bars. I'm setting it to 16th note straight, quantize. And now we play it back, and it's going to be bang on in time. I don't think that sounds bad. I don't think that sounds robotic, but it does sound nice and precise. Now, you may want to quantize some stuff to make it bang on, but you may want to make some things sound a little bit more human and kind of human error, in which case you can still do that. You don't have to make things absolutely bang on. You can make things just a little bit out. You might want to have these two kick drum hits just lag behind the beat ever so slightly, in which case, do it. You don't have to stick, once you've quantized all your notes, you don't have to stick there. You can go back in and you can make things sound a little more human if you want to. So right here, this should still sound decent, even though these notes aren't going to be absolutely 100% bang on in time. It's tiny little differences like that that can make it sound a bit more human. And that brings me to step number 5. Add subtle things in that make it sound more human. These are little specific little tricks that I do. I'll pass off a couple of them right now that I can kind of think of. So the main thing is things like flams. They're the things that I go back in and deliberately push out of time. So a flam is when a drummer will hit a snare, for example, and one stick will hit just after the other. So instead of it sounding completely bang on, you get this kind of cool... So instead of it sounding super bang on, you get this. And in the middle of a fill, that sounds kind of cool. Things like when two snares are hit at the same time, deliberately pushing one of them back, like in this example, to make it sound like a flam, makes it sound a bit more human. If those were to be bang on at the same time, it just wouldn't sound the same. It just sounds like one snare being hit, and again, that's not, for me, that's not what a drummer would do in that scenario. They would hit a massive, great big snare flam and then hit two cymbals at the same time afterwards. So you end up with this. The same kind of thing goes for if you have the classic kind of rock, hitting the snare, hitting the floor tom, building up kind of fill, not having such a great difference between how far apart they're being hit, but just making it slightly, ever so slightly delayed. So instead of this, you have this. It's a really, really subtle difference, but again, it's the kind of thing that not everybody would think about while programming drums. They'll think, oh, I want the snare and the tom to be hit at the same time, so bang, there they are hitting at the same time. If you push one of them back just a tiny amount, you get it to sound a little bit more human. And it's little things like that all over the place that will make the whole performance sound like an actual performance, not like you've just clicked in a whole bunch of notes. The main thing to take away from this video is that if you want your programmed drums to sound a little less programmed and a little less robotic, use velocity control, number one, and secondly, go in and add in human error where it makes sense. But the most important thing I would say is how important it is not to just buckle to trends, and don't listen to people who just flat out say, don't use programmed drums. It's cheating. It's not music. It's not the 1980s anymore. Plugins sound amazing these days. Samples sound great. And if the difference between you putting out music and not putting out music is, well, I don't have enough room or money for an actual drum kit, I don't know how to play an actual drum kit, so I'm not going to make music, I think that's a crying shame. And I just think that, screw it. If you like what it sounds like, then do it, and don't worry about what other people think. Is there anything that I have missed? Are there any tips that you use that you think might make my music sound better? Or are there any tips that you think other people could benefit from? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys think. Enjoy your programming. Enjoy your making drums with a laptop instead of an actual drum kit. I think it's awesome. I don't have a problem with it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.